Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this mini course. We're going to spend about an hour or so on effective leadership and how emotional intelligence makes or breaks you as a leader. So let me ask you guys right out of the gate, when you think of emotional intelligence, or maybe you've never heard of that phrase before, who here has never heard of the phrase emotional intelligence before? Who here has never heard of that phrase before? Okay, so we've all heard of emotional intelligence. What do you think emotional intelligence is? Just so I can kind of gauge what you guys think emotional intelligence is. How would you define it? What are some elements of it? I mean, you can give me examples of it. What do you think? Let me hear from you.
Never being too high or too low, uh, maintaining your self-control throughout any type of situation, whether it's stressful or enjoyable, that you're just able to be that steady rock leader that everyone looks up to.
Okay, yeah. So it's about being even kill. Is that kind of the theme that you're going with, Tony?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, that's good. That's good. You hit a couple of important components in here. You're going to hear back here in just a second. What else? What else are you guys thinking, or when you hear of emotional intelligence, what are you guys thinking? Who else has a thought?
I didn't get a hand up fast enough, but I've never heard that term before.
Oh, you did not. Okay.
No,
All
I've
right.
never
That's good. That's good. Well, this is gonna be important for you because a lot of people, and I'm glad you bring that up, Rob, and thank you for being honest because I know in a room like this, I'm always like, oh, I'm not really sure because I don't want to look like I don't know something. But that's fantastic because I'll tell you, for a while I didn't understand what emotional intelligence was, and I was confusing the need for IQ versus EQ, like your emotional quotient versus your intellectual quotient, your intelligence quotient. And many businesses put way too much emphasis on IQ and not EQ. And the most effective leaders have been measured to have a much higher level of emotional intelligence than their actual intelligence quotient, than their IQ. So having high emotional intelligence is an absolute necessity for being an effective leader. So that's why I'm making this connection between effective leadership and emotional intelligence. One more person. Let's hear from one more person, and we'll move on.
I think that the way that I kind of understand it, and I don't understand it fully, I don't know, is being able to acknowledge your emotions and analyze them. And then if you have to make a decision, do that first before making a decision while you're feeling some type of way. So just being able to acknowledge it and analyze it and not make a silly decision off of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Tricia. Thank you. I appreciate your input there, and you hit a couple of other components that Tony didn't quite land either, or didn't quite land. He just said about being more even keel, where you're saying, hey, recognizing the emotions, unpacking those emotions and figuring out maybe where they're coming from, why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And that relates to something that's one of the 5 areas of emotional intelligence that we're going to be talking about here today, which relates to self-awareness, self-control, or self-regulation, however you want to think about it, motivation, empathy, and of course, social skills. And we'll get to all 5 of those here in just a little bit. But let me ask you before we move on, what is not having a team costing you? What is so? Let's face it. For anybody who has ever not read the book Who Not How, the idea behind that when Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy wrote that book about Who Not How, it's about having an effective team in place to do all the things that you need that, just let's face it, you just can't do. If you're looking at this in the context of 4 core functions of business, now again, every business has the 4 core functions of business. Does anybody know what those 4 core functions are? Some of the inner circle folks might know it.
I've got it written down somewhere.
Brandon, I will give you a pass. I know it's probably tucked away in one of those hats, but no, it's lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting. Every business has to have all 4 of those: lead gen, sales, operations, accounting. And lead gen encompasses a lot of different things, not just advertising, not just not just specific marketing things, not just doing networking. It's all of that stuff. It's all the stuff that's combined with your lead generation. Again, direct mail, direct calling, whatever it is. All of that stuff is combined in your lead generation. Then you got sales. Once you get the leads in, now you got to figure out a way to handle those leads, and that is what's done through the sales process. And the sales, and in fact, Mike and Gabby and I talked about a little bit of that on a coaching call today about how to be a little bit more effective in the sales process, right? Once you have that conversation, and we talked a little bit about that. So you've got lead generation, you've got sales, then you've got the actual operation. Well, what is the operation? Whatever your business is, right? It's like if you were in the roofing business, you're a roofer, right? You're doing the roofing thing. If you're a baker baking bundt cakes, then you're baking bundt cakes, right? If you're a candlestick maker, whatever it is, that's the operational function of the business. That involves the fulfillment piece, right? So you have lead generation, sales, operations, and then the last one is accounting, right? And the accounting function is, again, this is the most commonly neglected piece that happens in business where, generally, and I have an accounting degree, by the way, so I'm going to admit to this, that generally when I was bringing in money, I would say, well, I've got more money coming in this month than last month. I must be doing all right. I got more money in my bank account than this month than last month. I must be doing all right, right? You don't need to raise any hands. No, nobody needs to indict themselves here. But let's just pretend it was only me that feels that way, okay? So that way you can be like, shame on you, Mark. You should not do that. But honestly, so in that context of the 4 core functions of business, what is not having a team costing you?
Time.
Yeah, time. It's not
Freedom.
having the effective use of your time. What else?
Freedom.
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 Focus.
Oh man, Rob, that's a good one. Did you say focus?
I definitely said focus.
Oh, brother, I get you, brother. Man, and that is so hard to get your focus back, especially when you've been used to that habit of being distracted and allowing yourself to be distracted. And that happens all the time, right? I put some thoughts up here, but having a team allows you to be more effective with your use of time. It allows you to delegate the tasks that you suck at. And there's plenty of things I'm terrible at. I will say this and I will own this. I know I am a great coach, I'm a great strategist, and I'm a great teacher. And I can own those things because I am terrible at most things that precede and follow. You want to test me on that? Send me an email, because if it wasn't for my chief of staff and it wasn't for my executive assistant, I don't know that any of my emails would actually get read, because they have to handle that stuff for me, because I just don't do email very well, right? It's just not a way that I prefer communication, but I know there are a lot of people who do email me, and those emails do need to get read. But it allows you to delegate the tasks that you're simply not good at. And I don't want to get drawn into hours and hours and hours of being on someone else's to-do list, which in my opinion is what email is. So if you're looking at this, you can grow faster. You can also have higher quality output when you're not super worn out from trying to do all the things. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So these are the sorts of things. And one more thing is, it allows you to get better at the things you are good at. Does that make sense? Did you ever notice that? Say that again.
Totally true.
Absolutely, Tony. Right? Think about it for a second. Some of the greats, right? Like him, don't like him, whatever. Tom Brady, was he ever an effective blocker? Hardly. No. He maybe knew how to do it. Did he lead the league in tackles? No. He didn't do that because he knew what he was great at. And certainly he was part of a team. Does it mean that he wouldn't tackle somebody? No, it's just that it wasn't in his skill set to do that effectively. And likely he probably would have gotten hurt if he did try to tackle somebody, right? I mean, if someone's trying to run back a football that he picked sixth, well, then he might try to tackle him, or at least block him or slow him down enough to allow someone else to catch up and tackle him. But he couldn't take hits like that, right? So it allowed him to be better at the things he was already good at, right? And that was reading the defense and seeing the strategy and putting putting the football through a needle if he had to. Like that's what he was good at. So during my day, because I'm not taking time getting sucked into email and all the different minutia, if I'm not on a coaching call, if I'm not shooting a video, I'm in research. I'm in research mode. I'm reading. I'm taking the time to pull into other stuff that y'all as business owners don't have the time to do because you're so operationally focused and operationally busy. And that's okay. That's my role as a strategist. So that's exactly why I'm allowing myself to get better and better and better at the things that I'm actually good at. So again, this is what a team will allow you to do. So when we're talking about a premise of what we're looking at and through the lens of actually what leadership actually is, this actually, the next few slides actually come from my leadership masterclass. I'm going to go through a few of these, but the most effective and impactful leaders, first and foremost, they inspire trust. And trust is going to be one of the three main pillars that we're going to be talking about tonight, because effective leadership always begins, starts, ends, and at the end of the day wipes its mouth with trust. There's no getting around that. You cannot be an effective leader without it. Other aspects of this is you're learning with the intent to teach, meaning that you're learning things so you can pass this on to others, that especially things that are in alignment with your vision. And not just your business vision, but your personal vision, and not just your vision. Who else's vision do you need to be mindful of? Who else's vision do you need to be mindful of?
Team.
Say that again, Brandon.
The team.
The individual team members. That's exactly right. The individual team members, you have to know what they're about. Like if they're trying to expand their family and have children, if they are having trouble getting their kid to daycare, if they're wanting to get married, if they're having problems at home, if they're trying to educate themselves, if they're trying to go back to college, whatever their dream, maybe they're just wanting to get a Dodge, an old school Dodge Viper, right? Whatever it is, whatever it's really important for the leader to understand their vision. And why is that? I mentioned it earlier. It's one of the components to effective emotional intelligence, effective leadership, and that is motivation. Is understanding their vision helps you to enable them some motivation. You understand the motives behind their motivation, and if you don't know that, it's really going to be hard for you to motivate anybody. Really, most people, the best people, are going to be self-motivated, but that's not always, unfortunately, that's not always the case. Let's see. Alice wrote something here. I think. So this is probably in what we were talking about, what emotional intelligence is. Alice said, I think it's a way of effective communication and regulating your emotions, and also being able to be empathetic. Very good, Alice. Appreciate you being here, and I'm glad you're representing South Florida. Okay, so number 3 is to magnify the talents of others. Which by magnifying the talents of others, like, are there people here? Where are my numbers people? Where are my numbers people? There's always a few of you in the room. Okay, Dave, you're a numbers guy. Okay, all right. I'm kind of a numbers guy too. My background is actually in accounting. That's what my degree is in. I actually worked in the field of accounting. I actually worked in the field of underwriting for a while. I really do appreciate the numbers and the metrics, but it's hard for a lot of people to imagine that they would be like, oh my gosh, I would love to spend all day at a computer doing bookkeeping. I would absolutely love that, right? Me, I'm the worst person to keep my books because I just know I won't do it. But for some folks, there are people who absolutely love that stuff, who would love to hire someone to do that for them, right? Where they're handling all their books. Okay, Steve. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So I'm seeing some hands. Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mike and Gabby. This is what I'm talking about when you're actually allowing other people, allowing them to magnify their talents because they are able to do the things that they love, and you are able to separate yourself, and you're freeing up a lot of extra bandwidth. Number 4 is it encourages discovery. Number 5, so discovery, I don't want to gloss over that. Discovery is because you have more open bandwidth, you're now able to actively allow your mind to expand in other areas because now you're not worried about things that are getting forgotten. All you have to remember is to go have your meetings and manage by metric. Those are the main things that you're trying to accomplish by allowing discovery. Yeah, Alice is saying that she would hire a bookkeeper and an accountant. So I don't blame it. And Alice, you can go ahead and unmute and we're having like an open discussion here. So you may not be in a spot where you can contribute, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. Number 5 is this again. This is the most impactful leaders are equipped with a high degree of emotional intelligence. That's actually the premise of tonight's discussion. And then they unite each other. They unite others, themselves, and others towards a common vision. So these 5 or 6 things, these premises right here are these are leads into the 3 leadership pillars that again is in the leadership masterclass. And those 3 leadership pillars are trust, vision, and communication. Trust, vision, and communication. Are there other components that are necessary for effective leadership? Of course, there probably are. There's dozens of different things. Like, for example, in the Marine Corps, we were taught 14 different leadership traits, around justice and judgment and decisiveness, integrity, dependability, tact, initiative, endurance, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, enthusiasm. Do you think those were beaten into me? Yes. And the reason why we remember those things is because every single Marine was taught if there's 2 Marines standing together, one of you is in charge. And you better damn well know all there is to know that's important about that other Marine. Why is that? Why was that important? Why do you think that they were? I mean, the Marine Corps boot camp was nothing more than a leadership course. Why do you think that was important that they instilled on that in us just right from the very beginning?
So you can work together effectively.
Work together effectively to make sure that you could know how to motivate your people. Do you think it would have mattered if we're getting ready to deploy and this guy right here, some guy in your squad that's a key member of your squad, that maybe he's the guy that's on the heavy machine gun, and he's you've got your whole platoon, and this guy right here, your heavy guy, your heavy machine gun guy, and he's getting ready to have a baby. Do you think his head is going to be in the game? Kind of important for you to know stuff like that, right? This is why it's important, and they talked about that this is stuff they brought up. They would ask how many people in your squad, how many people in your platoon are married, how many of them have kids, how many of them want to go back to college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was important because they really wanted to know. This is all stuff. So again, all those other elements, I'm not saying are unimportant, but you cannot be an effective leader without these 3 for sure. And you're going to understand here in just a second. So in terms of the trust thing, this is really, really important when, for example, you cannot go anywhere without trust. You just simply can't. So the trust is the foundation of everything. If you've ever read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, the foundation of the dysfunctional teams is what? Lack of trust, right? And because there's a lack of trust, Lencioni talks about vulnerability-based trust, right? And predictive trust. So he talks about the 2 different types of trust there. Predictive trust is like, well, I know he's going to do whatever he's going to do, right? That's predictive trust. But this is vulnerability-based trust. This is about being able to trust that someone is willing to put themselves out there, just like a battlefield general who's directing from the front. He's not phoning it in from the back, in the rear with the gear, under a hardened tactical operations center. He's up in the front getting shot at with the guys. He is putting himself at risk. That's what vulnerability-based trust is. This is where you're sharing something about yourself to say, hey, yeah, it could be used against me, but I just want to share this with you, right? That's building trust. If you don't have that trust, without that trust, conversations are going to be kept super light. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone you don't trust? What is that like? What's that like to have a conversation with someone that you don't trust?
Very difficult.
Awkward.
It's difficult. It's awkward. Do you get really deep in the conversation?
No, very shallow.
Exactly. Very shallow. Like, hey, Steve, how's it going? Oh, Steve's like, yeah, I'm good. Yep, good. Anything new going on? Nope, nothing new. Nope, nothing new. Absolutely. Right. So it's kept very shallow. Whereas, again, in the next team dysfunction above the lack of trust is the fear of conflict, that they cannot have healthy conflict because they don't have healthy conflict, they don't know how to have conflict. So they try to avoid all conflict, which means they avoid all hot button topics. Oh, we don't talk about those things here, right? Or there's just certain things in a relationship. Anybody ever have a relationship? And I'm using air quotes here, a relationship with someone where you just couldn't bring things up because it would always end in some sort of fight, right? That's horrible. It's an awful way to live. And because of that, because there was that lack of trust, there you couldn't have and engage in healthy conflict, right? You avoided hot button topics. Things were just kept superficial. Just yeah, okay, yeah. We're not really getting to any real meat and potatoes of conflict. We conflict is you can have healthy conflict, and healthy conflict is actually how we grow, right? It's that adversity where we can say, I'm not sure I agree with that. Can you tell me your point? Oh, okay. Not really sure that I still agree, but I do see your point. But maybe, and maybe we grow from that as individuals. That's what healthy conflict is like. At least everybody is heard. And above. So again, we talked about lack of trust. We talked about fear of conflict. Above that is lack of commitment. Lack of commitment. Has anybody ever been on maybe like an HOA board, or maybe even a relationship where you talk about the same thing over and over and over and over with no resolution? Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Okay, I'm getting one hand. So Steve, just you and me. Okay, Dave. So it must be a Maine thing. Okay, so you guys in the northeast, sorry that you guys are having that issue alone, but no, it is. It's a very common thing where, especially if there's lack of trust, especially if there is fear of conflict, and again, lack of commitment, and showing the way that lack of commitment shows up is when you engage in things over and over and over again without any real movement forward, without any resolution. The next two levels are I'm just going to gloss over these because I want to get to the other leadership pillars here, and then I want to get into the emotional intelligence piece. But the other two components there is avoidance of accountability, and that's where you constantly miss deadlines. Things just never get done. We're not operating at a high level. We frequently lose jobs to other higher level players. And then the last one is inattention to results, where again, we're just not paying attention to the metrics. We often operate at a loss, or we just don't flat know. We're not paying attention to the metrics at all. And that is a very common thing among those 5 team dysfunctions. So again, that is lack of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and of course, the last one is inattention to results. So when you're looking at this about building trust, trust is foundational for everything else. Let me just make this point. If you don't have trust, having vision and communication won't matter, right? Because the next piece of vision is about being vision focused, where you know where you're driving the ship, you know where you're planning on going. And this is really, really important, because if you don't know where you're going, you really don't have a mission, you really don't, and you have this team, it's like, okay, what are we doing? I don't really know. You may have their trust and you may be able to communicate some compelling message, but there's nothing, you're not driving them in any real direction. It's like you're loading people up in a car to go on a trip and drive in circles, right? You've got to have a compelling vision in terms of where you're taking them, in terms of where you're taking your team, where you're taking your organization, where you're taking your marriage, your relationship, where is this thing going? Does that make sense? Can I get some hands? Does that make sense to everybody? Yep. All right, thank you guys. I'm getting some head nod. Thank you. Very good. So the last piece is communication. And you have to be an effective communicator. And I mean effective communication in every aspect of that. So I know some of you have been coaching clients of mine for a while. Okay, let me see, maybe hear from some of the OGs, or maybe even some of the newer people. I feel like I'm an effective communicator. Like, Mike, would you agree? Or Steve, you've been working with me for a while. Would you agree that I'm an effective communicator?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Why do you feel that is true?
Probably because you listen more than you talk.
Okay. I would say that's actually surprising. I would think I talk a lot more, but okay. But I appreciate you saying that. Why
Well,
else?
what I'd say is once that you listen before you engage, that's probably a better way of saying it. It's like if I'm when I'm listening to somebody, I literally have to watch their lips move before I need them to stop before I jump in, because I'm constantly trying to think of what I'm going to say next. And I've been working on that, but that's not something that you do. If that makes more sense as to that you listen more than you talk. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. What else? What else would make me an effective communicator? Or maybe an
Pay
effective.
attention to detail.
Pay attention to detail. Okay. All right. Okay. What maybe not me, for some of you, what makes someone an effective communicator that maybe is in your life? Some of the other folks.
Repeat back to them what their concerns are.
Repeat back. Okay. All right.
I think when you can relate with that person and speak to them, your tonality matters too when you talk to a person, but when you can relate to that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, that goes back to what's something that's called a communications pie, right? And in terms of conveying emotion, where you've got 55% is related through body language, 38% is related through tonality, and a mere 7% is actually conveyed through the words. And that's when you're conveying an emotion about something, right? Very good, Trish. I think that's great. Let me ask you something. For those of you who I've coached, do I just give you a lot of advice without asking any questions?
No,
Okay. So
never.
would it be fair to say that I ask a lot of questions?
Yes.
I just asked 2 questions back to back and you didn't realize it?
Very
Right?
true.
Well, your questions are a little leading.
They are. And they're meant to be, Ken. Good to see you, brother. I'm glad you're I wouldn't be a conflict unless Ken was here. It's good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in a while. And of course they're a little leading, but sometimes and I'm yes, I was definitely leading in those instances. But here's the thing. I'm not using any one particular tool to communicate, right? I use a lot of story. I use a lot of metaphor. I open with a lot of questions. And that's one of the things that have been taught to me about other coaches that I have worked with, is that many, many times when I was working with other leaders and I was looking at why some leaders were great and some leaders sucked, is because they tried always to use just one. This is the one thing that I'm going to use. I'm going to use it this way over and over and over. You can't just use only metaphor. You can't just use only story. You can't just only ask questions. You can't just tell people. You have to have a combination of things. You have to have a level of a level of tonality that makes a difference, right? That Trisha had brought up. So there's a combination of so many things in terms of the communication that really makes a difference to be an effective communicator. And again, and this is all of these different things combined is what makes effective communication. So yes, in this particular case, it's not just one specific area. Now in this forum here, I am teaching, so it does make more sense to maybe be a little bit leading with my questions, maybe be a little bit tell more story, or be a little bit more directive. But again, having an effective method of communication in and among these 3 pillars is absolutely critical. Like I said, are there other, does decisiveness matter as a leader? Of course. But I'm just saying, without these 3, it's really going to be difficult to be an effective leader in any capacity. So let's talk specifically about emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence can be a little bit difficult to teach. And the part of the reason for that is because the 2 different approaches, I know this is a little bit hard to see, it's small on the screen, but on the top left there, it talks about the neocortical or cognitive or conscious approach to teaching emotional intelligence. And this is where you're like teaching definitions, like this is the thing. And, and I'll be honest with you, it's ineffective because sometimes it even makes the problem worse, because sometimes people are like, oh, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to be more self-aware. I'm going to make sure I understand the motives before the motivation. Right. And sometimes it makes it worse. And this is especially true with people who already have lower levels of emotional intelligence. And sometimes the word emotional intelligence can be substituted for just simple maturity. So this is really interesting that people who have lower degrees of emotional intelligence tend to see a lot of injustice in the world, even though the world is just, I think everybody here just understands, sometimes the world just is unfair. That's just sometimes the way the cookie crumbles. And people who have lower levels of emotional intelligence tend to just not react or respond well to things like that, right? Not talking about injustices that, I mean, again, that clearly are injustices. I'm just talking about sometimes it's just you're just having a bad day. You know, sometimes you get 2 flat tires. You're like, really? I haven't had 1 in 5 years, and all of a sudden I get 2 in the same day. You know, sometimes that's just the way it goes. But, you know, teaching emotional intelligence can be ineffective if you're just looking at it strictly from a definition perspective. So we're going to try to do a little bit of that and trying to give you some other things to work on, just more than understanding the simple definitions. It also doesn't last when you're doing a simple neocortical, let me teach you what this is approach. And it does not address the part of the brain that needs to be retrained. So for those of you who've been in my Vision Masterclass before, you understand about the retraining and the affirmations and things like that we're retraining the part of the brain, the limbic part of the brain, which actually helps respond to feelings and emotions and things like that. And that is what is needed for this stuff to be lasting. So again, if you're having struggles with that, or if you haven't taken the class yet, everybody on here is invited to take that. If you haven't been through there before, let me know, and I'll be happy to include you in the next training. For those of you who are going to be in or near Chicago this weekend, I'm actually going to be up there on Saturday. If you want to attend, please just send me a message and we'll see if we can make that work out for you. But the limbic, if you look on the limbic or subconscious approach, this is which trains the portion of the brain which needs the training, right? Like if you see someone, let's say that you're walking along and you and a friend is just walking along and some old lady slips and falls, and not like a gentle fall. Like we're talking like feet up, skirt over the head, smashes down on her back. And their first response is to laugh, right? That's someone like that can't be like they go, oh my gosh, right? Like if it was one of my friends, I probably would do that. But if it was an old lady, I would be immediately worried. Like I would be like instantly in my heart, I can tell you that is very true for me. But some of my friends would probably laugh no matter who it was. And that part of the brain it's hard to control because it's just limbic. It just reacts. It's the fast part of the brain, faster than the cerebral neocortical part of the brain. So this is about retraining the brain to something that's different. It also tends to be developed naturally as we age. Again, sometimes it's just simple maturity, and the approach is much more likely to last when you're taking a limbic, non-neocortical or subconscious approach to training your emotional intelligence, and that anything can be programmed and reframed. It's just entirely up to you in terms of what you want that to do. And again, that's why I'm so big into recorded affirmations in terms of what it is you're actually trying to retrain your brain to do. So let's look at the 5 elements of emotional intelligence. So these are self-awareness, they are motivation, they are empathy, self-regulation, and social skills. And I'll give you guys, I'm putting them all up there so you guys have an opportunity to read these individual things. But when hold on, we got some chats going on here, make sure. Alice said, you are very effective, you are to the point and insightful, thank you. You use a lot of stories and analogies to explain things. Okay, thank you, Gabby. Mike, I didn't see that until just now. I think people feel her. Okay, thank you guys. I appreciate you saying that. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any comments. All right, so the self-awareness piece, this specifically is this leaders listen first, right? They really, I heard this before and I really like this thought, is they seek to bless and not impress. So when you're trying to bless someone and not impress someone, you're showing up differently, right? Would you guys agree? Right? If you're just trying to bless someone rather than impressing someone, can we agree that we show up differently? We see some hands? Yes? Okay. Seeing some heads nod. All right. So if that's true, they seek to understand before being understood. And that is a Stephen Covey thing that was talked way back in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And again, they try to see things straight before they try to set things straight. And that's a really important consideration when you're being and operating at a high level of self-awareness. They hold themselves accountable, and particularly when it comes to their commitments, all right? And it's also being aware of what assumptions that they're making. So this is being self-aware. this, again, what's written on the screen is self-confidence, recognizing and understanding their moods, their emotions, and what drives them. So this level of self-awareness is really, really important. And this is really important to remember this just for a moment when you start talking about building your team, right? Because the whole point of this is about bringing people into your tribe, and you want people like this, right? You want people that are self-aware, especially people that are going to be managing jobs for you, especially people that are going to be maybe managing customers for you, or managing complaints, or maybe they're going to be a sales manager, or maybe they're going to be managing other components. Maybe they're going to be an acquisition manager if you're a real estate person, or whatever it is. But you want them to have this level of self-awareness, and it's really important that you bring that to the table as well. Let's look at motivation. Motivation, when it comes to motivation, motive always precedes motivation. Motive precedes motivation. And once they understand your motive, once your tribe understands your motive, they will understand your reason for your motivation. Does that make sense? Once they understand your motive, they will understand your reason for your motivation. So a lot of, and we're going to talk about this here in a second, but when we're developing more intrinsic motivation, sometimes the motive is just you want to do good work, and that's enough for a lot of leaders who just want to do and be more effective leaders. Let's look at number 3, which is empathy or social intelligence. So sometimes people call empathy social intelligence. This is where you're just simply listening, but not just with your ears. You're listening with your eyes, you're listening with your heart, right? And we're going to cover more of this later on, but paying attention to what assumptions are being made, right? And if I don't say this later, it's going to be important. I just want to make sure I cover it now. It's in the absence of love where our differences are magnified. It's in the absence of love where our differences are magnified. And when we can lead with love, and I know that sounds real squishy, and some of you are like, oh, this is really too much for me right now. Okay, I promise we'll get through it together, right? Come on, bring it in. Bring in a big old squishy hug. But here's the thing. Wouldn't it make sense to just, when you're leading with love, when you're leading with grace, and it's not giving people a pass. We're talking about true, genuine love here. We're talking about true, genuine, care for people, but not enabling bad behavior, but holding them accountable, right? There were certain things, like my mom loved me, and there were certain things I just could not get away with, right? Because she loved me, right? And I had bosses that loved me, and I had other people in my life that loved me that say, dude, what are you doing? Why are you going off the reservation that way? And they pulled me back because they knew that was not what was good for me. So I just want to make that point about and being in the absence of love. Number 4 is self-regulation, and having the awareness to avoid impulses, and again, holding yourself accountable. Because again, at the end of the day, who can hold us accountable? Who? Weston, can Angie hold you accountable?
Yourself, that's it.
Okay, I'm going to give Weston a pass. Angie can absolutely hold him accountable. But really, at the end of the day, right? Like Angie, he can be in big trouble with Angie, right? And but at the end of the day, it's really about Weston holding Weston accountable. It's really about me holding myself accountable. My bride can hold me accountable to certain things, but I could just go, whatever, and just live with the fallout, right? But the reality is, the only accountability is the self-accountability that we have for ourselves. So it's really in terms of that self-regulation piece that it really can only come internally. And last is social skills. And this is the ability to clearly and effectively communicate and connect with people where they're at, meaning we're going where they are. We're showing up where they are. If they're, I talked a little bit earlier on a little bit of sales training that I was helping with before. Was it talks about the perfect mess principle, where you can't be so perfect more than someone who's a total mess. Like if they're a mess and they're like crying and you're like, well, it looks like you're super upset, right? That's not going to go well, right? You have to be a little less of a mess than them, right? And if they're perfect, you have to be a little more of a mess than they're perfect, right? You can't match them perfectly. Otherwise, it's just going to be like going toe for toe, or you're going to have two people who are a complete blithering mess, and none of those are effective. Right? So you have to be able to mirror and match, but you also have to offset it a little bit to direct them and lead them in the direction that they want to go in, right? So let me just ask, in the context of instilling new skills, You know, which of these areas do you feel you could be better at? Which of these skills do you feel like you're good at? Let's start with the good ones first. Who feels like they've got some of these skills that they really, I own this. I am great at it. Go ahead, unmute yourselves.
Just a second. I'm pretty good at empathy, social intelligence.
Okay, very good, very good. What about the rest of you?
I feel I'm clearly effective at communicating and connecting with people with where they're at, no matter if I agree with you or not. I can still have a conversation with you and hopefully enhance that conversation.
So maybe empathy and social skills?
Probably.
Okay, all right, very good. What about some of you others?
Motivation.
Motivation, really? Rob, do you feel like you're internally or externally motivated?
Internally,
Internally, very good. That's
I
our,
guess. Yeah.
yeah, internally meaning like you're self-driven. You don't have to, fire up Rocky 4 music every time you wake up in the morning, like don't
Yeah,
get me
that's a good
wrong.
way. That's a good way to describe it. Yeah, no, it's most of my motivation is it's already there and it doesn't need to be ignited. It doesn't go away.
Right, don't get me wrong. I'm all for a little bit of Eye of the Tiger, but I can absolutely be internally
Yeah,
motivated.
that's why I said most
Yeah.
because a little on a little hype every once in a while to keep you going a little faster or to keep you going doesn't hurt, but most of it is it's just there and it doesn't go out.
Absolutely, man. I will break you. That was one of the best lines ever. But if you haven't seen Rocky 4, for those of you who are under, I don't even know what, 30, yeah, you definitely need to see that movie. At the height of the Cold War, it was just like a big thumb in the eye to Russia. It was fantastic. All right, the Soviet Union. Someone else, one other person.
So I'm definitely not, I do not understand social skills. I do not understand the emotions. I don't grasp that. So I have to really rely on other people to help me on that area because I don't get it. I don't understand empathy. I understand empathy. Don't get me wrong. I can feel empathy, but I don't understand why somebody is where they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. That's that, and that's a little bit of empathy. I mean, trying to understand, where they're at. Social skills kind of wraps everything together in terms of having the effective communication. But yeah, I understand. I get it. And sometimes there is no understanding, and that's sometimes the best we can get, right? How about some stuff? So Ken kind of tipped it off in terms of, so Ken, where do you feel you are good? You said you feel you are good with empathy, or
Oh, I'm not very good with empathy. I can very well communicate and translate between. So my skill definitely comes from the technical to the C level. I can go from the very technical to the very common, shall we say? But I can't necessarily pick up if somebody's upset at me or if I've overstepped the boundary of some form that they perceive. So I definitely can translate, but I cannot understand
yeah,
somebody's emotions. I had a falling out with a business partner 6 months ago. I still have no idea what I did wrong.
yeah, yeah.
No clue.
Well, and I will say though that I do feel though, Ken, you do have a fair amount of self-awareness. Um, I mean, having worked with you for a while, I can say that. So, and definitely self-regulation, I think, is probably something that you do have quite a bit of. I would say those things.
Yes, I have those, but I just cannot understand other people.
I get you. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, very good. What about some other struggles that some people are having?
I'd say that I used to struggle with self-regulation and all the others I was pretty self-regulation is now I'd say one of my biggest muscles. But it's still one of those things, you kind of you have to build it if you don't have it.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, and I'm glad you brought that up, Lauren, because you got to consider our habits, right? Habits are the things that we do and sometimes don't even pay attention to, right? And that's a self-regulation piece. But habits are also the ways that we think. The ways that we think. Have you ever been around somebody and just instantly been in a bad mood? And then you realize that you're just in a habit of being in a bad mood around that individual, right? That's sometimes habits are not just the things that we do, habits are also the ways that we think. Habits are also the way that we feel. we can get in a habit of feeling a certain way, right? We can feel unsettled in a certain, like you go to a cemetery and you automatically feel unsettled. Well, why? Is that a habit? Is there any particular reason to feel unsettled on a piece of ground that, I mean, you're not going to hear anybody complaining, right? Like, what's the reason behind it, right? So the whole point there is that, there's in that self-regulation piece. So in my thing here, I would say motivation is probably the one that I have to work on the most. I would say I feel like I've definitely have a high level of emotional intelligence, substantially more than even just a few years ago, but I still do struggle with motivation sometimes. And knowing to do, I know the things that I need to do, but sometimes just getting them done is just not what I want to do, right? So I have to, we're going to talk about developing this here in just a few minutes, and we'll talk about that. So any one other person, any other struggles? Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Lauren. Anything else that maybe someone's struggling with?
I'd also say motivation for me. By the way.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Empathy. You said empathy? Yeah, very good. Now I want to point this out. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. Here's the one thing. Some of you are going, like Gabby can relate to Ken. Go, yeah, I don't get empathy either. I just don't get it. Like get over your feelings, get over it, right? Like I had to, and I don't know why you're crying about this, or again. Or self-regulation, or like, hey, just buck up, just buckle down. What's your deal, man? Right? Look, all of us are going to have different struggles in different areas, and we're going to have different struggles in different areas at different times. Because again, if you're looking, going through the book, The Willpower Instinct, when we talk about relying on willpower, if we look at our willpower like it's a battery, when are we most likely to give up on stuff? When we're stressed, when we're tired, when we're distracted, when we have an STD, right? Stressed, tired, distracted. Get your minds out of the gutter. STD, stressed, tired, distracted. So when you're stressed, tired, distracted, that is most likely when you're likely to cave into bad habits or just give into stuff. Like my mom, I would work on her all day, and I'm like, hey mom, can I please? Hey mom, can I please? Hey mom, can I please? Right? And then usually around 8:30, 9:30 o'clock, 9:30 at night, she's like, fine, go play with the chainsaw. Fine. It just whatever, and I'm like, yay. Right. But it wasn't that bad. My mom was Scottish. She raised us a little rough, but the thing was, she was a good mom, but I also knew how to wear her out because I didn't necessarily know that their willpower battery was down. I just knew that it was almost near the end of the day when she was worn down that I could get what I wanted. So let's talk about what to do about developing this stuff a little bit. And again, there's no real one-size-fits-all approach to this. So I am going to give you a few things to maybe consider if you have different elements that you want to work on, or maybe strengthen some of the things that you're currently working on. Maybe these are some things that you can use to help strengthen this. So developing self-awareness, developing a higher level of self-awareness, I don't really think there's an order of importance when it comes to each of these five, but I can't possibly imagine there being an effective leader without having some degree of self-awareness. Like just read the damn room, understand what is going on with not just what's going on in the room, but what's going on with yourself. So, if at the base of this, we're trying to be better leaders, right? We're trying to build what? What are we trying to build? Think three pillars. What are we trying to build with those other people?
Trust.
Communication.
Trust,
communication.
Trust, vision, communication, but we're trying to build trust with them, right? And in order to build trust, the fastest way to build trust, Mike, do you remember? The fastest way to build trust? There's two mics. Whoever can beat you to the mic.
Vulnerability.
Which mic is going to go to the mic?
Vulnerability.
Not yet. Nope, not quite.
Relating with them, understanding them, and then matching them.
The fastest way to build trust is to show what? Is to demonstrate what?
Oh, credibility.
Credibility and
vulnerability.
No, if vulnerability, yes. So there's vulnerability-based trust. You are correct, Teal. But if I'm trying to do that quickly, like say I call you on the phone, right? And I'm a salesperson, okay? I can't go straight to vulnerability because it will be weird, right? The fastest way to build trust, especially with someone that you don't know, is credibility. Okay. So if I go straight to vulnerability, I'm like, Teal, you don't know me, but I just crapped myself. Like, wait, excuse me? I'm just being vulnerable with you. I really am. I'm just being vulnerable. You're like, thank you, crazy person. I'm gonna hang up now,
Yeah.
right? Right? So Marky made poo poo. No, like that's not gonna work. Like, yeah, I'm being real vulnerable, but that is not gonna help build trust. If anything, that's going to build the opposite of trust. Like this dude is a freak. Okay. So if I'm looking to build trust quickly, it's about building and creating credibility, right? So credibility builds trust very quickly. Okay. Now I can't just stand around and only rely on credibility. I also have to rely on what? Character, right? So I need to make sure that I'm building character along the way. But so I can't just say like, oh, I know all of the specifics. Like Lori is a really good at peeling back the numbers of real estate deals, and she's really good and she's very credible. But she also understands that there's a need to be human, right? And she does that in a very, very effectively. And she's been a very effective real estate investor because of it. Lori, it's good to see you here tonight. So, in terms of developing self-awareness, right? Again, we're trying to be self-aware about how we're showing up to other people. And again, showing that credibility, showing that vulnerability, like you said, Teal. Like again, if I was getting on a sales call with you, Teal, and I said, "Hey, Teal, yeah, I recognize you have this problem. I might have a solution for you, but listen, don't be embarrassed because I've struggled with stuff like this too, right? Did I just give a little bit of vulnerability there? Yeah. Hey, you know what? Hey, I struggled with, incontinence too, whatever. I'm just making this up. I don't know, but whatever it is, right? I struggle with debt too. I struggled with, relationships too. So I totally get it. Maybe I've got a couple of tools in my toolbox that might help you. Would you be open to receiving them? Right. And then she's like, oh, yeah, okay. Right. So let me tell you what kind of struggles that I've had in relationships. Let me kind of tell you what struggles I've had in business and so forth and so on. Right. So again, it's about being self-aware. Now, here's some of the thing that I will tell you about that's definitely been beneficial for me. And this is something if you are very interested in walking further along the meditation path with Lauren, she is a freaking, like, she's a Jedi when it comes to this stuff. I know enough, but I will tell you that Lauren will take you to mastery level meditation stuff because she's just very good at that. But I will tell you that taking time to slow down, taking time doing breathing exercises, what's something that Lauren has coined box breathing, where you're breathing in for 4, hold for 4, blow out for 4, and then rest for 4. So that's called, I didn't know that was called box breathing, but something like that. And doing that from anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, it's slowing your heart rate down. It's increasing something called heart rate variability, and it actually helps develop your self-awareness. Taking time in simple meditation, where you're not thinking about anything except your breath, and doing that for simple 5 minutes at a time. And maybe 5 minutes might be too long for you if you're just starting out and this monkey just keeps chattering in your brain. That's okay. The worse you are at meditation means that the better for you that it's doing. So just keep practicing at it and ramp that up by a minute or 2 every day, and take that time. Put your phone on airplane mode, set your timer to 5 minutes and 30 seconds. And by the time you breathe out that last breath, you're ready to hit your 5-minute meditation, and you're just focusing on that. So that is something that that will definitely help raise the level of self-awareness. I will say a couple other things is maybe recording yourself on video, like when you're having conversations with folks, maybe just recording yourself, or if you're a stage speaker, recording yourself is probably one of the best ways to recognize, like, oh my gosh, do I say 7,000 times? I know I do. So guys don't need to tell me that I do. But is that really something that I'm really worried about? Is that something I didn't even notice about myself? Recording yourself around other people will definitely help you in your self-awareness. Here's another thing, and this is probably one of the tougher ones, is being in a community where you can get honest feedback. And that honest feedback from people who will give you honest feedback, such as belonging to a peer group, maybe it's a prayer group, or maybe it's a mastermind. I know some people here belong to my mastermind, but if you are not in a mastermind, I would highly, highly encourage you to belong to one, especially one where you get to know the people over time, because they will be honest with you. And sometimes that truth can be really, really difficult to hear. So let's move on from developing self-awareness to developing self-regulation. So let me ask you, are you someone who reacts harshly to bad news and you just fly off the handle and you storm out of the room and kick the dog in the trash can on the way out? Or are you someone who seeks first to understand, recognizing that there is an emotional impact that you're having, and likely if you're having the emotional impact, others are experiencing the emotional impact as well? And can you act and reframe that in a positive way and go, well, this is horrible. What can we actually learn from this, right? And maybe it does take time to just remove yourself from the environment. I know when my bride and I are very infrequently, we have disagreements. But when we have a disagreement, we know we have enough self-regulation to go, I need to stop. We're good, but I literally need to take a walk for a minute. You can walk with me, you can do whatever, but I need to remove myself from the situation right this second. And she gets it. She doesn't like it, but she gets it, right? And sometimes she needs to do the same thing, right? Where she'll go and she'll take the keys, and she just quietly takes the keys and she goes, I'll be back. And I know what she's doing. She's going to the car to scream, right? And she'll come back and she, air quotes, feels better. But the point is, we have the self-regulation now to know when we've had enough and when we need a pattern interrupt. So I want you to recognize that self-regulation has a trickle-down effect on the people that are lower down in your organization or in your tribe. Okay, so self-regulation, when you are self-regulating, right, it has a trickle-down effect. So it has a positive effect to people in your organization. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. Has anybody ever worked for a boss that was like frequently in a bad mood? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you, right? Yeah. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yep, Lori, I know you have, right? So in the bad mood, did everybody all of a sudden it just trickled down the organization that everybody somehow was in a bad mood? Yeah, it sucked. Trisha, thank you. Yeah, it sucked. And that's just not fun when you're having to deal with that. And Teal, you don't even have to put your hand up. I know where you're at, right? But so this is where that self-regulation piece, you have to recognize that you are having a direct impact on the people in your organization and in your tribe. Now, again, self-regulation, recognizing this, it enhances integrity and alignment, and it also helps with trust. So, what are some ways that you've experienced someone with good self-regulation? Has anybody experienced someone with good self-regulation? Nobody?
What does that look like?
As
Well,
an employer, I think it would be hard to see. If you were an employee and we have an employer who has great self-regulation, we probably as an employee wouldn't pick up on it very well.
that's yeah. I mean, if you're highly emotionally intelligent, you will see it, right? But otherwise, it's almost one of those things that you don't necessarily recognize. I mean, for example, does everything always go swimmingly in business? Does everything always go swimmingly in life? No, hardly ever. I mean, things tee up sometimes, but how are they? I think Rob, I think it was Rob. I think Rob, you brought it up about being kind of being regulated, right? Like being not being too much in your, or actually it was Tony, not being too high or too low in your emotions, right? Like you can be emotional, you can celebrate, but you're celebrating with the team, right? Or you can be bummed out, but you're like, man, okay, but you're being bummed out with the team, but you're not having these crazy highs and lows. So I think in terms of self-regulation, for me anyway, that's what it also comes back to, self-awareness. I don't think you can have self-regulation without self-awareness. I just don't think it's possible. So I think that self-regulation is the fruit that's born of the tree of self-awareness. Does that make sense? Right? So if we're going to develop more self-regulation, again, you can't correct habits that you're not even aware of. And because you can't correct habits you're not even aware of, you have to be aware of the habit in the first place, right? So if you're aware of the habit, if you're developing that self-awareness, that will help you with self-regulation. So that goes back to, let's do our meditations. Let's take our time during the day to take 5 minutes to just breathe, right? To just recognize and focus internally and become more self-aware. So that is in terms of being self-regulatory. And it also is really important when people are pointing out to you, hey, do you realize that you do this? And again, whether that's a mastermind, a peer group, a prayer group, whatever it is, that can help that. Let's look at motivation. Now, I mentioned this to Rob earlier about being intrinsically, internally motivated or extrinsically or externally motivated, right? This is where if you're internally, you're just doing the work for the love of the work, right? If the people that you're leading, the people in your tribe, if they know your vision, they know where you're going. Like there's no question about what your motives are behind your motivation, right? Remember, motive precedes motivation. So in terms of motivation, and again, this is one of those things where you have to recognize where your motivation comes from. And the way, and I don't have a whole lot of time to unpack this, but I was trying to figure out a way to like, check your motivation. But for those of you who are familiar with the 6 human needs, right? So the 6 human needs are, does anybody remember the 6 human needs? I'll buy someone lunch that can recite them. Nope, not happening. They're gluttony, sloth.
No, no,
No. Okay. All right.
no.
All right. Significance, certainty, variety, love and connection, growth and contribution, right? Significance, certainty, variety, love and connection, growth and contribution. And understanding how those needs, those psychological needs play out in your motivation. If you're very significance driven, meaning you have to be the most important person in the room, if that's your motivation, then understanding why you are significance driven is going to be really important. If you are certainty driven, there's a lot of people who are certainty driven, right? Where are my control enthusiasts in the room, right? Are there any control enthusiasts in the room? Okay. Look, I will fully admit to being a recovering social, control enthusiast because I like to be in control of things. But recognizing that just was an empty well that was never going to get filled up in an uncertain, by definition, world, that was never going to happen. But when I looked at, significant certainty, when I was looking at variety, when I was looking at love and connection, when I was looking at growth, when I was looking at contribution, when I was looking at those other 4 human needs that I could get and be motivated by, all of a sudden things started to shift for me. And especially when I am particularly now motivated by growth and expansion, I am motivated primarily by contribution and giving back to others. That has really largely changed the motives behind my motivation. So I think the best way to unpack and understand motivation is understanding the 6 human needs. We're almost done, guys. I know we're running a little long, but I just want to cover these last 2. Last one is empathy. Now, this is the most easy to recognize, but it often most gets confused with sympathy. Again, sympathy is about you. If you are having sympathy, you are making it about you. Empathy is about them. It's about literally taking yourself and putting yourself in their shoes, not necessarily experiencing their emotions, because that becomes codependence, but understanding their emotions and just saying, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with your decision. I don't necessarily agree with your line of thought, but I can at least understand where you're coming from. Okay. I don't agree with it. Right. But that's kind of where we're at. Okay. But that's what empathy is. It's not asking you, it's really truly just kind of putting yourself, hey, look, if you had the same upbringing as me, if you had the same background as me, if you had the same education as me, if you or non-education, or if you had the same experiences as I do, this is what empathy is. Okay. So when you're looking at empathy, this is where you really have to stop and say, okay, now that I'm understanding a little bit of terms of where we're at in and putting myself truly in their scenario, sometimes it does help to actually disassociate yourself from the situation. And by disassociating it, what you're doing is you're actually removing your emotions. You're almost removing yourself, and you're almost watching it like on a TV screen, right? Or you're almost watching it like 2 actors as a play on a stage, right? So sometimes you can use visualization to help you with this in terms of empathy, because when you're looking at this, you can say, oh, you know what? I don't necessarily agree with how this is playing out, but I do understand it. Okay. And one thing that you can, especially if you're working with people who are trying to develop higher levels of empathy, and this is actually true in children, but I think it's also true in adults, is understanding the 5 love languages, right? So what are the 5 love languages? Does anybody know? Sloth, gluttony, pride. Keep getting that
Acts
wrong.
of service, words of affirmation, or is this like a different set of love languages?
No, you got it. You got it.
Giving gifts.
Yep. Yeah, you got them. So I remember, so it's words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. So the way to help develop, and this is not the only way, but to help develop empathy in yourself is to communicate in as many of the love languages as you possibly can. Okay, and have others communicate with you in as many love languages as possible. So if you're doing this with children, with teens, with young adults, or with someone else, I'll put this out to you. If you're in a relationship, or even if you're in a relationship with someone else that you care about, it doesn't necessarily need to be a physically intimate relationship, but it needs to be a relationship that you care about. Is, try to do where you communicate in all 5 love languages for, say, 7 straight days. So in other words, if I'm going to communicate words of affirmation to my bride and I maybe leave her a note, words of affirmations, right? Hey, sweetheart, I haven't told you I loved you, and leave a note for her, maybe stuck to the mirror, right? Giving quality time, and that's quality time is actual physical, mental presence, not just, oh, we're hanging out on the couch, both on our phones. I'm physically, mentally present with her, right? In quality time. Acts of service. And again, the acts of service is if I go home and mow the lawn, that's not an act of service for her, right? That's not a dialect she's going to understand. But if I go home and wash the dishes, if I go home and take Lily and go for a walk and give her a 20-minute break, that's an act of service for her, right? So we've got words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, receiving gifts. What's the big thing about receiving and giving gifts? Is it about taking them to the store and buying them something and just handing it to them? What's missing in that scenario?
It's about taking the time to think about what you think that person might like, and the fact that you thought about it and then gave them the gift of something you think that they would appreciate.
Right. I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Steele, but I think it's the ceremony, right? It's the ceremony behind it. It's the little bit of a wrapping paper, or maybe a little bit of a bow, or maybe it's hey, I bought you a gift. Why don't you look under the covers, after you get up on my side of the bed, and it's there for them. And it doesn't have to be something expensive. It can be something, that's just meaningful, but again, receiving gifts. And then finally, physical touch. And physical touch does not have to be intimacy. It can be just simple, rubbing of the back, massaging of the shoulders, something along those lines. And some of you are just like, oh, physical touch. I don't do physical touch. You'll be fine. I promise you will survive. Okay. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, again, communicating in all 5 love languages, and try to do that for a week, right? Just make it a social experiment and see if your level of empathy goes up. And if it doesn't, you get your money back from tonight's call. So, and if you didn't pay, I will send you a credit card bill. I'm just kidding. All right. So finally is social skills. Okay. Social skills this is where you're friendly with a purpose, right? And this is where you're connecting with other people, and this is about being a little bit more socially open. Okay. Where again, you're leading the conversations with love, where you're not automatically looking for differences, but you're again leading with love. Or again, remember, I made this point earlier, where it's the absence of love where differences are magnified. So you're trying to lead with love and not necessarily try to find the differences right out of the gate in the conversations. Okay. So the last point I want to make here is, so how do I find these people for my tribe? How do I find these people for my tribe? Because I would love all of these different elements and everything else. Well, this is where you're looking at your interviews, okay, where you're bringing people into your tribe, especially if this is something that you're looking for your business. But let's face it. Even if you're interviewing, if you're single and you're looking to interview people that you want to necessarily maybe think about spending time with, right? It's always first and foremost behavioral. The behavioral interview has to go before the skills-based interview. And the reason that's important is because of everything I just told you up here. Would it then make sense, right, that if you were going to be interviewing them, that you would give them interview questions based around these 5 areas of emotional intelligence? Would that make sense, especially if they were in a management position for you? Especially if they were going to be handling client accounts? Wouldn't that make sense, right? This is the difference. Now, again, if you're hiring for a Dollar General, you're just kind of going, okay, can you breathe on this mirror? Okay, cool, you're hired, right? Like that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about hiring quality people for your organization, right? So that's why the behavioral interview always comes first before the skills-based interview. And I always have done at minimum two interviews, especially when I was hiring for managers. But this is just something I want, and this is the last piece here that I'm going to be talking about, is that your team of today is not going to be your team of tomorrow. So as you're interviewing these folks and as you're bringing more of these folks in, look, either they are going to change and evolve or their names will change and evolve. Because if they're not going to be willing to change, you're going to have to change your team members. Does that make sense? So, all right, guys and gals, that is all I have for tonight. Let me hear from you guys. Let's hear some takeaways. Let's hear some what you're planning on implementing, and we'll wrap this up.
Well, I know that I missed most of the meeting, but you were talking about those love languages, and I just wanted to share that one of the best gifts I ever got, this was a long, long time ago, but
She froze.
I think you froze, Teal. Now we're on the edge of our seat.
Just
What was the
trying to
gift she got?
captivate the
Oh my
audience.
God, this is terrible.
What a
This would be a
perfect
great way
place
to
to
screw
freeze.
with us too if she's. All
remember
right, Teal, I'm gonna mute you for just a
that. It's a
second.
girl move.
Okay. Teal, you're in a horrible area because I'm having trouble. Let's hear from somebody else while her internet catches up. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to say also on the love languages, hopefully I don't cut out too. But you just the way that you bring them up and how you can implement them in a lot of different ways. It's like I'm considering writing out how can I implement the different love languages in my marketing, and then going on appointments, things like that, talking to people in person. Maybe I could bring something with me as like a, hey, here's something for you, or like here's something that I can leave with you, because different ways, there's different ways you can market, but then also in my communication, if I could touch on the different love languages, maybe they'll receive that better too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways that you can implement it as long as it doesn't come across as manipulative. I think that's a great way to build rapport and a great way to connect with folks. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, good idea. Good idea, Mike. There's someone else.
I see a lot of importance to congruency between all of these pillars. When you actually are talking about, as far as starting to build trust and, rapport with your employees, it's important that, even just in body language and verbal language and how you speak, how you make eye contact, and, to show your empathy, you have to be congruent along all those lines, or else you break that chain that actually builds the strength of that relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. And because that integrity, to me, integrity is about being in alignment. Being in alignment with what you say, what you do, and all of those things in that in those elements of emotional intelligence is about congruence. And if you're out of congruence in any of those areas, people are just going to call you a phony, and they're not going to want to pay attention to you, right? And this is where it goes back to that cognitive versus limbic approach. Like, this is going to take some real programming. This is going to take some real intention to actually change things. So that's just the nature of this. One more person. We'll wrap up. No other takeaways? All right, guys. Well, I will leave you guys to it. Thanks so much for sticking around tonight. I will post this on YouTube, and I will share the link out there. So for those of you who maybe are watching this on replay, if you guys have any questions, reach out. I'm happy to help you any way that I can. Dave, thank you. Weston, I'm glad you and Angie could show up. Mike and Gabby, good to see you. Steve, Mike, Lauren, Tony, Rob, Alice, good to see you. Everybody else, have a great night, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, Mark.